So I've called this Going for Digital Growth. So just a few points for us to open with, just to get us thinking about why digital is more than just to fill the gap for our churches, why it's worth us pursuing and prioritizing it as we move out of COVID and out of the lockdown world and into a post-pandemic world, hopefully. A question for you to think about: if you knew that 80% of your parish hung out somewhere where you had little to no presence, what would you do about it? So if you knew there was an estate or a street or some physical geographical area where 80% of your parishioners were and where you didn't spend much time, what would you want to do about it? And this is the case if we have a spread of demographics, unless we're in an area of town where there's a particularly elderly population, a majority elderly population, at least 80% of our parishioners will be spending a lot of time on social media. And that's why it's worth investing in going forward for our churches. We make decisions based on digital and media experiences all the time. In fact, we don't like making decisions without a prior digital experience. So if you think about if you want to go to a restaurant, or you're going to book into a hotel, or go to a campsite on the other side of the UK, we'd always check in online, see what the reviews are saying, see if we can see some photos, see if we can explore in the digital space before we start to interact in that space physically. We make decisions based on our digital and our media experiences all the time. And this goes way beyond just planning a restaurant. It goes towards how we make decisions about all sorts of things. And that leads us on to this third observation, that people will turn to their smartphone for help and for advice in a time of crisis. So they'll Google if they're feeling lonely, or if they need support with a certain issue, if they're looking for local services, or if they're struggling with their mental health. People will turn to Google, sometimes even before they turn to their closest relationships. So the question for us as churches is, will they find us there? If someone's looking for local support, if someone's struggling with a certain issue, and they're turning to their social media feeds before they turn to something physical, will they find us there? So this is all about thinking, this presentation is all about thinking of social media as a discipleship tool. Not just as a promotional tool, not just as something that helps people know, kind of like a notice board, a glorified digital notice board, but actually a discipleship tool. And as I said, much of this is taken from Social Media to Social Ministry, a book I would highly, highly recommend. Very short book, and the first half of it in particular offers some really interesting ideas for why social media is so worth leveraging for discipleship. And yes, this will break new ground for all of us. So bear with us and bear with yourself as we go through this. Some of this is really brand new and a real shift in thinking. But let's just go through it with an open mind together. So what we're going to be working through is this pathway that people, it's a descriptive pathway. So often if we thought about a discipleship journey, if our church was trying to put plans in place to take people on a discipleship journey, we might create a prescriptive plan. So this is what we want to funnel people through in order to take them to a desired destination. But what this is a more of a descriptive pathway of how people interact with us online, and how people interact often with organizations and with ideas on social media and in the digital space, and how we as churches could facilitate that journey so that it does take people to a desired destination, which is that they continue to explore faith and become a disciple of Jesus. So this is what this journey looks like when we interact with any sort of content and any sort of brand or personality or church or organization online. It often starts with a post that contains some sort of message or content, something that seems interesting, a quote or an idea or a good news story. And we think, oh, that's interesting. I want to find a bit more about that. So we go on a journey of exploration. We look back on that person's profile. We see a bit more about what they post. What do they say? What do they think? So we go on a journey of exploration. We look at their website, we look at other places online where they are. We try to find a bit more about them. Often people talk about going down rabbit holes in social media, where they've watched one YouTube video and it triggers another and another and another. We're all used to going on this journey in the digital space. And how could our churches make that possible? We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Often that then moves people to a stage where they want to start establishing a relationship. So they start commenting, they start trying to initiate interactions with that organization, with that brand. And as we know, a lot of those relationships that happen online are surface level. They simply happen in comment sections or in liking or following. And as churches, we want to take people further than that. And maybe we don't think real relationship is possible online, but I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, we might be more open to thinking that it can happen meaningfully. When people start to experience change, so what I mean by that is they've been interacting with ideas and with a new ideas or a certain content or a certain group or a certain organization or a certain person online, they might start to realize, hey, actually, this is making a difference. And that leads them to identification, where they actually start aligning themselves with that thing, with that person, with that idea. They start to identify themselves with it and say, yeah, I'm not just an outside observer. I'm not just a curious explorer now. I'm actually part of this. I'm starting to identify myself with this. And then eventually it leads them to say, I want to share this with others. And hopefully, even though that's a relationship, a journey that we might go on with all sorts of different ideas and brands and organizations, I hope that you can start to see what that might look like if, as a church, we leverage that process. If we could take somebody on that journey digitally with our church, how would that take them on a journey of discipleship? So that's what we're going to run through briefly now. Beginning with our message and our content. Nona Jones in her book says the reason most people have not given church a try is a perceived lack of relevance. So what if there were messages and content that we shared from our church on social media that would help people to see that the message of Jesus and our church is relevant for them? Whether it's a post that we do about something we've done in the community and why we've done it, whether it's a post that we share from our Sunday service, whether it's a Bible verse that we share and unpack, a video or some content that we've taken from elsewhere, from an alpha video, from a start video, from something online, from a YouTube video that we share. They'll probably start, the first thing they'll see from us online is a message or a content. And how can we help people to see that that message is relevant to them? And then we hope they would start to go through, if they've seen that it's relevant, they'll go through a journey of exploration. So they'll start clicking on your church's Facebook page. They might visit your website. And is that space enabling that journey of exploration is the key question. So if we think a bit more about what this might look like practically, this would look like us as churches to enable people to go through this journey with us, having a Facebook page, possibly an Instagram presence, a YouTube channel and a website, which catalogs and gives our content in a clear space that allows people to navigate it and to go on a journey of exploration. Key questions for us to think about is, how would we facilitate exploration in these spaces? What is it we want people to be able to explore? And how would we make sure our Facebook page, our YouTube, Instagram, if we use it, our website, enables this stage that we know people like to go on in the digital space? Talk a bit more about that, hopefully, when we discuss at the end. So then, if people have started to interact with your church's content, can we move them into a meaningful relationships? Not just superficial relationships which happen in the comment sections. Nona Jones in her book talks about the importance of feedback loops. And by that, she means to go on a meaningful discipleship journey, people have to be able to say, well, actually, I'm not sure about this. I don't agree with this. I'm challenging this. I want to learn more about this. And in order for that to happen, people have to be in safe spaces where we're building trust, where they're getting to know people, where they're able to have conversations. And that's where the discipleship journey really kicks into gear. That can't happen on a Facebook page. It can't happen in the comments section, but it can happen really well in some virtual spaces. So we've perhaps many of us have experienced how well Zoom short-term courses work, whether it's an alpha course or whether it's a course looking at our finances, or a course studying a certain passage of the Bible, or a prayer course. Zoom short-term courses actually work really well. People are finding that they're having really good interactions with them, and they're a great space for new people to come along and explore things with us. Possibly a safer and less uncomfortable space than coming to a physical location. Facebook groups and rooms. Those are more private spaces where people can talk more openly and where they can have meaningful interaction with your church and with its volunteers. And maybe hosted WhatsApp groups as well. These are spaces where digitally we can have meaningful conversations and develop meaningful relationships. I've just put a little note at the bottom, a note about under 18s. So actually these spaces unfortunately don't work as well with under 18s. When COVID is past, the space for relationship definitely needs to be a physical one for under 18s. But for adults, particularly for adults who, for whatever reason, it's just harder to make time to get out of the house or go to a certain location, or they're nervous or uncomfortable about that, these virtual spaces work as well, if not better, than some of the physical spaces we have put in place to help people on a discipleship journey. So as people go through this journey with our church, we can hope and expect that they would start to experience change, that they would start to realize that actually this is making a difference to my life. And isn't that the moment for all of us where we start to think, maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring? That actually the difference that faith is making to my life, the difference that this teaching is making, the difference that these relationships are making, it's starting to make me think a bit more seriously about this. So we can't mandate change, we can't force change on people, but we can invest in the message and the content, the exploration and the relationship, which will allow change to happen. And we can celebrate stories of change which help people to identify that change is taking place in their own life. So whether it's prioritizing testimonies and sharing stories online of how people are experiencing the difference that faith or the interaction with the church is making. And this will lead them to a place where they might want to start identifying, as I've said earlier, they might want to start aligning themselves and not just being an outside observer, but really belonging and making the church community their own and identifying possibly as a follower of Jesus. So we want to enable that moment or that process to happen where they can say, actually, I really belong to this and I'm part of it now. So whether that looks like giving them serving opportunities, whether digital or physical, whether it looks like inviting them along to a social action project that you're doing where they can actually be serving rather than just being served. It might look like actually taking them through a process where they can be baptized or confirmed. It's about offering that next step where people can start to identify as part of your church community and as a follower of Jesus. And as they enter into that process, naturally they will want to share that invitation with others. So they will want to invite other people into the process that they have been on. And really that brings us back down to the bottom of this layer again, where we can resource them with online messages and content, virtual groups, and places where they can invite their friends along to explore the journey that they've been on with us digitally. So just a note on those last two stages, what makes them possible? Well, the question to ask is, well, how will you help people make the community their own and identify themselves as followers of Jesus? That's an identification question, and it will probably change depending on your context and the context of your church. And then invitation. How will you make invitation easy as they begin to want to share what they're discovering with others? And often there are opportunities to share in the digital space that, that the physical space doesn't necessarily offer to us. So they can really easily share a video message, or they can share the opportunity to come along to a Zoom course. Creating digital opportunities for invitation is really important. Just a note on that, obviously I've talked about that as a digital discipleship process, but we can expect as people near the top of that, of those stages, if I just go back, as people move up this, that they will increasingly want to meet physically as well. Think about online dating or dating through apps for a moment. Even though that's becoming more and more popular, relationships that begin online don't stay online. You know, no one's in an online marriage. Eventually, those relationships move into the physical space. So we don't need to worry that by investing in a digital discipleship pathway, we're never going to see people physically, or we're never going to bring them into those physical in-person relationships, which are so important. We can expect people to start wanting to, say, for example, join us on a Sunday, or serve on a Sunday, or come along to a physical social action project as they start to identify and want to invite. So some last things. You might be thinking, well, this all sounds great, but this is just so far beyond what we can achieve as a church at the moment. So I'm just going to run through 4 practical concerns which might help your church to think through if you wanted to pursue thinking really seriously about the digital space as a discipleship tool. So first of all, we would want someone to sort of head up this ministry. So what sort of person would we be looking for? Well, it needs to be someone who's comfortable in the digital landscape, but sometimes we'll end there. So we'll have the person who's running our social media account be like a tech person or a young person who knows how to use Instagram. But actually, we need someone who can also lead people pastorally and relationally. So we need someone who can help people explore content and respond to questions. So someone who's going to oversee the Facebook groups and oversee what sort of Zoom courses we're offering and that sort of thing. Someone who can be part of those interactions, someone relational, and someone who knows where to point people for their next steps. So someone who's connected into the wider life of the church. The tech. So just 4 kind of bare necessities, I would say it's worth your church considering continuing to invest in. So investing in tools which will help people take what you're saying seriously, so that your digital presence, it just doesn't put people off by being kind of below the standard that people come to expect online. I would say all you need for this is a decent camera, which can be, to be honest, a lot of modern smartphones have a sufficiently good camera on them. There's a website called Canva. I can drop the details to that below in the chat shortly. Canva is basically a design template platform. So it's free and you can get designs for social media posts, for YouTube channel art, for video editing, all sorts. It will just really help you to up the quality of your digital posts. And it's just all templates. So you only have to really edit sort of the text and the image, and everything is done for you. Speaking of the images, pexels.com or unsplash.com, again, they're free websites and they're stock photos, but they're really high quality photos. So that might help you to just up the quality of some of your media. And I would really strongly urge you to consider investing in an ongoing Zoom subscription beyond COVID, because of what we've already talked about in terms of the value of Zoom short-term courses. Even when we can meet physically, sometimes they can be more accessible. The time. So people do have an expectation that online community is available 7 days a week, but don't panic. I would say to create meaningful community, you would need to input into this community twice per week. So what I mean by that would be 1 course session. So you might have a piece of something that they can meaningfully interact with. So whether that's you do a watch party of your Sunday service, or you invite them along to a short-term course. So you have one session with that per week. So one place where people can really get together and get to know one another in the virtual space, plus one intentional interaction. So what I mean by that is just another post elsewhere during the week, or a WhatsApp message, or something that just inputs into people. And on social media, you should be responding. So if somebody sends a question, or if someone comments, or if someone texts you, you should be responding with this community 7 days a week. That's the expectation that people have, that the online community is available all the time. But one person can't do that. And that brings me on to the team. So part of investing in a social media strategy would be investing in a team, in a serving team. So it might look, for example, like multiple virtual group hosts. So maybe people who are responsible for your Facebook groups, for kind of hosting that and keeping the conversation going, or people who are leading those Zoom short-term courses. And they should be the people that you would choose to host small groups in person. So the same level of kind of relational and emotional intelligence would be required in the virtual space as would be required in the physical. And people who are able to encourage others on their discipleship journey. And really, the technology requirement for investing in this is quite low. Once you've got a Facebook account and you've got a Zoom account, really, we're just looking for people who can be relational and pastoral, which so many people in your churches already possess the talent and the skills and the gifts to do that. So this is the last thing, and then we'll move on to a discussion. Is your church up for it? Well, it requires a cultural change, something like this, because prioritizing a digital discipleship strategy or digital discipleship plan means moving beyond our comfort zone and embracing new forms of interaction and exploration, so that people will be interacting with us in the virtual space and we won't necessarily see them physically. It requires a willingness to decentralize in order to go and make disciples. So seeing people who are interacting with us online and perhaps who haven't yet stepped foot in our building, still seeing them as part of our ministry and still seeing them as part of our community, and being willing to extend beyond the physical space to connect with those people. And it may require younger leaders as well to help us in the digital space. So that's all from me. I'm going to open it out to your questions, and I've just put a few on there to just prompt some thinking, and they might be questions that you want to note down and take back to your church. So are you thinking about a social media strategy in the longer term, beyond kind of COVID? What opportunities for the growth of your church, younger, number, depth, and impact, would a social media ministry create? That's a really important question. In what ways have you heard people minimize the validity of digital interaction? And do you struggle to see online interaction as meaningful? That can be a real barrier to us pursuing this if we don't think that actually online interaction can be meaningful and produce meaningful results. And what do you see as being currently possible, slightly aspirational, and virtually impossible for your church here? And I encourage you to be honest in that. It's a very aspirational presentation, I'm more than aware. I just put that last one on there. Have you been on a virtual online course? I'd really encourage you, if you haven't, to go on one, because it's quite an eye-opener to how well kind of digital interaction and digital relationships can be formed.